everyday rainy season we've been having with this front camped around us. It's kind of nice every now and then to have a day when the sun actually burns through the clouds and we can get her out and about and stay dry. So glad you were all able to make it out. As you can see, Tom is missing in action tonight. He's off in Chicago, and I'm sure this is Saturday night. He'll be at College Complexes up there at the original founding group. And I know he has a wedding and a funeral to go to on this trip, so he'll have some joy and some that's sorrow. But we're glad he was able to make the trip. He will be back in action next week. They may have ridden the train up. In fact, he does that quite often. I don't think they drive it anymore. But after working for the railroad for a long time, he's into trains, and I don't know if he gets a special deal out of them, but I sort of suspect he does. Anyway, I'm so glad you could come tonight. We have a couple of newcomers here this evening, and if you'd like to be on our email list where we send out the meeting notices every week, if you would write your name and an email address down on some kind of a scrap of paper and give me. I didn't bring a pad to do that tonight, I'm sorry. We'll be sure that Tom gets it and we'll get it into the internet here in the next week. I won't walk you through all of the upcoming meetings, but I think we are booked up through June 13th. And let's see, is it next?
Next Saturday we're not meeting.
I'm looking at a week-old meeting notice. Next weekend is Memorial Day weekend. So we will take a weekend off. No meeting next Saturday night. Did that come across? No meeting next Saturday night. So if you come to Barbeck's next Saturday night, they're not taking a holiday. You can have dinner, but your partners in crime will not be here. For those of you who have not been to the meeting before, I'll give you just a little brief thing. It started in Chicago back in the 1950s. Tom Berry and Susan, his wife, moved down. They had a son and daughter-in-law, or daughter and son-in-law, I forget which now, had moved down. He's a principal in one of the Dallas schools, and they were just starting their family, and Tom and Susan were retiring, and that sounded like, gee whiz, let's sell our condo in the high-rise right down on Lake Michigan and leave the cold winter and come south and enjoy family and start a new life. A lot of people don't like to do that after they've been in one city all their life, but he and Susan did, and they've brought this with them. Tom talked to me about it some. We got acquainted at Starbucks in Castle Linda, and as we shot the breeze and talked, he told me about the group, and I said, that sounds like an interesting format. And so I agreed to help him if he wanted to start one up, and we did. And my goodness, the variety of speakers and the people who've come. We're not all coming out of the same venue, you know. This is not a neighborhood association. It's not a group that meets at a church or synagogue or mosque or whatever. We're all pretty detached as far as our lives outside of the group, and so it does create some interesting variety. And so I've really come to enjoy it. Our viewpoints are not all exactly the same. We're not clones of one another, and that makes it interesting. Format, for those of you who've not been here, basically the speaker comes and he has 30 to 60 minutes to put his presentation on, and then we'll take questions and answers for a while. And then about 9 o'clock we'll try to change channels and let the speaker sit down, and we'll open the podium up for any of us who are here who want to make some comments about the speaker's presentation. That could include things like adding something to what he said, disagreeing with a position the speaker took, blah, 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 blah. Just stay on the subject. But during the course of the question and answers, that's not the comment time. Ask a question, you know, what did you mean by such and such, or have you thought of so and so? Save your comments for the time we offer to let you come up here to the podium and do that. One other thing about our format I will mention to you tonight, and that is Barbex is very generous with us in terms of not charging the group a membership meeting fee. And in exchange for that, we've agreed that we'll all come and order something. So some people come and they're fed, they don't want to eat, whatever. I can't read everyone's mind. And that's just fine. You can come and pay your $3 that we use to pay for the printing and all the expenses of operating the group. But the server will write you a ticket for $5 for no food if you don't order any. So they're not ending up with zeros. You know, as long as we are ordering food and patronizing the restaurants, then they very kindly give us a private room to meet in and place to sit and enjoy our evening. And in exchange for that, it's only reasonable and fair that we put some money in their coffers. So please do pick something off the menu and order it. If you absolutely don't want something, then expect to get a ticket from the server. That make sense? Okay. 5. Tip on it, right? Yeah. Yeah, we have one server comes in here and takes good care of us, and a lot of servers can't cope with this many people coming in and ordering food at the same time. So we appreciate the good service, and we want to be sure we're kind in return. All right. Does anybody have any announcements that they need to make tonight? I'll shut up on that.
Can I take your plate?
All right. I'm not going to read off all of the information that's on your program sheet. If you didn't get one, there's some here at the front. I'll be glad to deliver one to your seat if you want it. Okay, I see one hand go up. I'll do that. And let me just share a little bit and we'll get John started. John Beesley has been participating in our group for some time now. He's spoken to us on several occasions. We enjoy his presentations. Grew up in England, did his undergraduate degree there, was recruited by Xerox to come to the United States, and as I understand it, spent his career working for them, working up into a very responsible position.
Well, I want to eat. Are you eating?
No.
And while there, he completed, if I remember correctly, a master's and PhD. Was it University of Dallas? So I was recalling. I'm not reading, I'm just trying to recall. So if I err too much, John will then correct me.
I almost took out your foot.
But we always enjoy listening to John. He gives us a good presentation. He talks about subjects he knows something about. And tonight, the discussion about economics focuses on John Maynard Keynes. And I was sharing with John before the meeting tonight that when I took my accounting degree in the University of Texas system, we had to take, I think, 12 hours of economics as part of our business degree, and I took that. My money in banking the second year was from a professor who was on loan from one of the English universities, who was a very interesting person to listen to. Gave us a different perspective. I had a Lebanese professor who taught macroeconomics and microeconomics. So anyway, I took 21 hours of eco, and I found it a very interesting subject because you've got perspective of what made the world go around from a business standpoint. And if you were going to be a CPA and account for that. It sort of helped if you had a little bit of understanding, and I found economics very helpful. So John Maynard Keynes was the pretty much the premier economist at that point in time. The professors leaned on a lot, and so we got a lot of his ideas and philosophies and explanations for what goes on. So it's always of interest to me, and I think you'll find it interesting to hear from John, a good dose of John Maynard tonight. So John, bring John on.
Trusty chart. I reused some of my diagrams.
I saw that.
Yes.
Waste not, want
Yes. Okay. This is some. This is an old diagram.
Okay, well, as usual, I'm happy to be here speaking to you. And my wife is even more delighted that I'm here speaking to you because she's heard it all before and doesn't want to hear it all over again. So she thanks you profusely. So thank you very much indeed. Now, I was interested in speaking about Keynes for a long time. What has happened over the last, I'd say, 3-4 years, there's been a craze of austerity right across Europe. Apparently, they believe that they must balance budgets and cut spending, do away with healthcare and so on and so forth. And they believe that that will cause the economy to rebound and flourish. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not the view I hold. But let's see what has happened in England. In fact, it's on one of my old charts, using the austerity program. As you see here, this is an old chart. This shows you the cumulative growth of the gross national product. Gross national product is the whole output of the American economy, everything, goods and services combined. So that's what a country produces in a year, the gross national product. So what happened in the 2008, there was a crash, as you remember, caused principally by the financial system, just as it did in 1929. So what happened was the crash happened, there were layoffs, increasing unemployment, and of course the economy shrank. And this is the chart showing the degree of shrinkage. And you see that there are three colors on this chart. The green one, you might see that as blue, that's the USA. The red one is Germany, and the black one is United Kingdom. And you see that, basically speaking, the American economy shrunk down to by 4%, and then after about 3 years recovered, and then has gone on increasing since then, principally because there was a stimulus, Obama's stimulus, just under $1 trillion. Germany did a very similar thing. In fact, it decreased further, down by close to 7%, as did England. And you'll see that Germany recovered in about 3 years and has gone on increasing, not as fast as US, but because it's in the Eurozone, and the Eurozone is in austerity. The British government, here you see how England contracted and was recovering on the same path as the others. So what happened in 2010? Well, 5 years ago there was an election. And so the the new Labour Party, which I don't support, was thrown out, Tony Blair's party, and the coalition came in, comprised of the Tory party in coalition with the Liberal Party. And the first thing they announced was, there's been terrible overspending by the government, and they've caused this recession. And so we must cut back, so that we must reduce our budget spending. And that way we can recover. So you see what happened. There was a double-dip recession. And now, as I would have thought or projected, you see this chart takes us up to 2013. Well, and so this whole cutback, they cut back. Actually, what they did, the first thing, they decided they'd give their friends a tax break. So they reduced the tax rate from 50% to 40%. But to compensate, they put up the VAT, which is the value-added taxation, which is like a sales tax, from 18% to 20%. And so then they began slashing the welfare budget. They began to say that these people on welfare are scroungers, they don't want to work, and so they cut the benefits to the old, the infirm, and so on and so forth. But because they had to cut back spending, it was the opposite. And apparently, the British people went along with that. They agreed, okay, we have overspent, we must cut back. I mean, just as John Maynard said, here, he said, the American people have had to, in this downturn, cut back on spending. Well, the government has to too. See, so that's kind of the austerity notion. Well, nowadays, at this time, 2015, England is not quite caught up with where they were before the recession. So that was what happens when you have this austerity craze. It actually stops the economy recovering and growing. Now, in this last election, over a week ago, apparently the British public en masse decided that this policy, austerity, was correct. That the government, in fact, they trusted the government's economic policy and the cutbacks, so they voted them back in again. The other thing they've said, basically, many working people, is that the more left-wing party have been helping the poor people unemployed too much. In fact, they're living off, they're living off benefits, and it should be cut back. So those are the two notions that happened in England, and so the party of austerity is back in power. And of course they believe in privatization. In fact, last year they privatized the post office, and they're on track to privatize the whole National Health Service. That's what they'd love to do, and they're now probably given the mandate to do it. So I thought that we best expose this whole notion of austerity and what it really does do to an economy. As you can guess, I'm against it. Anyway, let's start here. Open up my book. So that's really why I think it's important to understand what Keynes said. Now, these ideas are not that simple, they're counterintuitive, so I will try to go as slowly as possible and as clearly as possible. If you've heard something, a word that you don't catch, hold up your hand and say, what does that word mean or something, and I will translate that into Texacan, okay? All right, let's start. So who was Keynes? Well, he was born in Cambridge in 1882. He was the son of a Cambridge professor. He won a scholarship to Eton College. Now, Eton College is the most prestigious private college, primary school in England, and it's fee-paying even today. Now, then after that, he went to King's College, Cambridge, and he studied mathematics, and he obtained a first-class honours in maths. Then after that, he studied economics under Marshall and Pigou. They were very famous economists in England. And he scored a pretty low mark in economics. And in characteristic style, he said, well, the reason was I knew more economics than they did, so that was his modest contribution to that. So after that, after he graduated, he joined the Indian Civil Service for a few years, and then he went back to Cambridge to teach economics. Apparently he knew more about it than his professors. And then the World War I started, and he was drafted back into the civil service. And at the end of World War I, he was asked to write a report by the British Prime Minister on German reparations. But he disagreed with the Allied settlement for Germany, which imposed very high separations, very high reparations, yes. And so consequently, because he disagreed, he wrote a book titled The Economic Consequences of Peace that made him famous, because he said, look, these reparations will stymie Germany and it will cause problems in the long run because they're resented. And that's basically pretty much what happened. In the early 20s, he married a Russian ballerina and became associated with the famous Bloomsbury set. The most famous person, of course, is Virginia Woolf, but they were all artistic, and he was pretty artistic too, and he supported the arts himself. So he was a multifaceted man. Then in 1923 he wrote a book called The Treatise on Monetary Reform, and that was against the England returning to the gold standard at the pre-war value. It was overvalued, and of course it didn't work. England was forced off the gold standard in the early 30s. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was Mr. Churchill at the time. He was a Liberal member, but Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so he wrote a book called The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill. So he always wrote books when he disagreed. Then in 1930 he wrote The Theory of Money. In 1936 he wrote this seminal book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. Now all these things, employment, interest and money, are bound together. So you have to understand how they interact to understand Keynes' theory. And I shall try to explain that. Then in 1940, the war started, and he wrote a book called How to Pay for the War. And during the war, England had a lot of interaction with the Roosevelt government on economic matters, and he led the delegations on 3 different occasions. The most famous meeting was at Bretton Woods in 1944, and I'll cover that. But in 1937, he had a bad heart attack, and he was basically ill, very ill from then on, and died in 1946. So he obviously did a lot of work in economics. I can't cover everything, but I want to cover 3 topics that are important. The first one is really his understanding of the business cycle. That's to say, why does the economy go up and go down and so on and so forth? Why does that happen? And more importantly, how do you get out of it? This business cycle has been going on for centuries. It's not a new phenomenon. It happened in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. The earliest explanation was given by somebody called William Jennings, who was from University College London and then became a professor in Manchester University. And he noticed that these cycles are about 11 years long and coincided with sunspots, which sounds strange, but you've got to realize the sunspot cycle coincides with the sun getting hotter and weaker. And his theory was, well, this caused the harvests to be good and then bad. So this then caused the business cycle. So that was the first explanation. But later on, obviously, as Britain industrialized, you still had these economic cycles. So obviously, the harvest theory didn't stand up. So now, let's look at how the classical economists viewed the economy. I mean, how did they think it worked? So this diagram is next, and I'll go around how they thought it would work. The classical economists were Adam Smith and Hume and David Ricardo and people like that. And by the way, their views are still current today, so it's important for you to understand how they think. So here you see the diagram, simple diagram of the economy. So this here is a description of the whole economy with the gross national product being created here in the economy. It has two inputs. It has materials inputs and labor inputs. Now in those days, the major productive businesses were the financiers, the merchants. They had the money, and it was really self-financing. So banks per se really didn't enter into the picture. So you could say that the reinvestment in the economy was done internally by the companies. And by the way, in America today, that's true today actually. Most of the reinvestment is internal reinvestment, strange to say. So what does the economy do? Well, it actually does two things. It creates supply, which are goods and services, and it creates demand, which is income. So income, of course, is paid out to the labor force, and they spend money, which is consumption, buying goods and services. So there is a loop, a feedback loop. So the supply of the goods and services is paid for by the money created by paying the labor force. So you have this loop. And so supply equal demand. Now, the classical economists felt that what would happen in a downturn is that the economy would recover, because when there was a downturn, you had, yeah, all right. When there was a downturn, there would be, the materials would cost less, and the labor would cost less. And so what wasn't profitable before would now become profitable. So the industrialists would invest, and so then the economy would pick up. And then what they said, the normal state of the economy was full employment. Because you might have a downturn, but by this mechanism, by things, materials and labor getting cheaper, the economy would recover. And so supply would always equal demand. Now, what did they mean? So they said that full employment was the natural state of affairs. But what do you mean by full employment? Well, it would never mean 100%, because what would happen, say there's a factory and it has 10 production lines, and so there's more demand for its goods and services, so it says, I will open up another line, but I need 5 more people to man that line. But in the labor force, I've only got 3. So clearly, I can't hire 3 people doing nothing. Because if I did, I would have to pay everybody less. Okay? So I don't hire those 3. So if you demand profits in that sort of environment, you always have a modicum of unemployment. Okay, so you never get to full employment. Which brings us to our old friend Karl Marx. So what did he say? Well, now I'm speaking, it doesn't mean I'm a Marxist, but it's always interesting to know what Marx said. He said that the business cycle is a feature that is caused by the capitalist system. You're not surprised by that. So how does that work? So this was his theory. He says that the mere fact of competition in an industrial age means that an industrialist will buy a new machine, a more efficient machine, because he has the money. And what does that mean? It means that it will require fewer workers. So that will cause unemployment. And of course, then the next, his competition will also buy a newer machine. So that will multiply the unemployment. So that will cause the economy to dip. And so what will happen is that these people, unemployed people, will gradually be reabsorbed, as time goes on. But that's the primary cause of the cycle. Now he said because of this, because of the fact that people won't employ, everyone, there will always be unemployment. The economy always gives the appearance of a surplus population, always. And we see that in America today. Basically, what we see today, full employment, is categorized as reaching 5%. So what does that mean in America today, 5%? And you say there's always 8 million people who are going to be unemployed, no matter what. It's the way the system works. Now we know the 5% is not true. It's more like 8 to 10%. So there's always between 16 and 20 million people in America unemployed by the way the system works. So Karl Marx said this is unacceptable in the economy. We should do better and employ people. Now, employing Keynesian economics in England after the war, the unemployment rate in the 50s and 60s was 1.5%. So using Keynesian economics, you can get a higher level of unemployment than has ever been achieved in America, because America basically has never gone full bore in creating full employment. Because there's a reluctance to go full bore on Keynesian economics. They don't want a deficit spend. Because, as I will explain, the only way to get full employment is for government to intervene, and they're against that by definition. They believe this really, which is that the free market will operate, and so it will always recover back to a full employment, which probably it might in the long run. And as Keynes said, in the long run we're all dead. So what did Keynes say? Well, here's his analysis of the model. In fact, actually, this is my model, but because Keynes's publication was 1936, and it was a purely word description. So this is, I think, more understandable. Basically, in England in the 20s and 30s, a very high level of unemployment. In the 20s, unemployment never came down below 11%. And in the 30s, it never came down below 16% and peaked in early 30s at 22%. So there was a persistent level of very high unemployment. And so, of course, if you believe the classical model, this shouldn't be, because the economy should have recovered back to totally full employment, and it didn't. So Keynes looked at this and said, well, what's going on? Obviously, there was more to the model than the classical people said. So how was the Keynes model different? Well, I'll take you around this slowly. Again, you have the gross national product, which he categorized as Y here, materials and labor going in, and reinvestment. But then again, you have the supply of goods and services, and you have the demand created by the income paid to people. But there are three components there's a consumption, which is spending, and there are people saving, and that goes via the banks into the investment, which goes in productive investment round back into the economy. And of course there's the government, there's tax. And of course the government spends the money, F. So for supply to equal demand, you have a total of 6 variables. Now what Keynes said is, look, take this reinvestment here, how does that, why does savings have to exactly equal investment? There's no reason why it should. He also said, look, if this is too high, okay, then you'll get inflation. If it's too low, you'll get recession. So he said, basically, looking at this, there is no reason why this should come to an equilibrium position at full employment. It ain't necessarily so. And that was the revolutionary idea. And people at that time, the famous economists like Pigou and Lionel Robbins, didn't accept that. They said, no, it's bound to come back. Well, you can see what happens in normal economy. You know, if people don't spend, okay, then this will contract. If there's not enough investment, the economy will contract. If you have deficit spend, if you have underspending by the government, that will cause a contraction. Now, understand the way this works coming back. When spending here decreases, the effect is 2 to 3 times the amount of underspending. And that's by the accelerator principle, which I've discussed before. I won't go into it now. So if you have a small contraction in spending, either by the consumer, or by investment, or by the government, it will cause the economy to contract by 2 to 3 times. And so, for example, last year you saw the oil prices crash very fast. So just a small drop will multiply. Conversely, if you overspend, again, it will cause the economy to grow. So that's sort of the model. Now, this model can be explained in a different way by, it was proposed by John Hicks. Now, John Hicks, graduate from Balliol College, Oxford, taught at LSE, and he explained how the balance between employment, money, and interest worked. Now, I'll try to go around this slowly, but they are all tied together, and they must be in balance for the economy to be in balance. And so, let's define 2 things, important things. Money, which is one of the components here, the money supply. What is money? Well, in an economy, obviously, you must have money to spend, and the bigger the economy is, the more money is supplied, and it's supplied by the Federal Reserve. Okay, I won't go to how it is, but it's supplied by the Federal Reserve. Also, you have a demand, which is this spending I talked about in the diagram before, and you have 3 sources of demand. You have consumer spending, you have savings, which translate into investment via the banks, and of course you have taxation. So that represents the demand. Now, I've drawn 3 cases here. This is the normal case. This is when the supply of money, of course, the higher the interest rates, the more obviously the more money will be supplied. So you come up this curve. Here is the demand for money, and of course the lower the interest rates, there's more demand. So at balance, where the supply of money equals the demand for money, they will balance out at a given interest rate. Okay. Like when you want a loan, as you know, say you want to buy a car, if the interest rate is 15%, you say, well, I can't afford that. If it drops down to 5%, you say, okay, now I can afford it. So you have a balance right throughout the economy. Now that corresponds to a gross national product of Y0, which corresponds to a given level of unemployment. So you can see on this model, employment and the money supply and the interest rate all have to work together to be in balance. Now, money supply is as I said, supplied by the Fed, and it can move up and down. Money can be taken out, and is taken out of the economy by the Federal Reserve, and they do this by buying and selling government bonds. For example, if they buy bonds, okay, government bonds, that pumps money into the economy. If they sell them, that takes money out of the economy, and that increases the interest rate. So let me go over that again. It's a salient point. So the Federal Reserve, by buying and selling government bonds, can change the interest rate. So why do they do that? Well, let's take the first example of a.
What happened?
I've gone. Oh, I can speak in this. Oh. One mic isn't working here. Did I touch it? No, still not working. Oh, here it is. We had a technical glitch. All right. So let's take the case, the normal case of a mild recession. Okay. Let's say the economy is going into a small dip. So what does that look like? Well, obviously the demand drops. So I will draw what happens with my purple pen. So the demand drops. So this curve moves down here. All right. So now obviously as it moves down here, the gross national products drop. So we're imbalanced down here. So, and you've got higher unemployment. So the Federal Reserve says, okay, I can increase the money supply. So there you are. You've increased the money supply, you've lowered interest rates, and so that encourages people to spend and businesses to invest. So the economy then picks up. So normally speaking, the Federal Reserve, by jiggling the interest rates and the money supply, can affect the gross national product and the level of employment. Now, it is very odd that we allow a private bank to do that in a democratic society, but that is what we've done. Interestingly enough, after the war in England, the Labour Party nationalised the Bank of England. Under the new Labour, they privatised it again. But the selling point is, by increasing the money supply, you can lower interest rates, and by increasing it, you can lower it, and then going the other way, you can raise interest rates. So by raising and lowering the money supply, you can jiggle around and cause employment to contract if the economy is overheating, and then expand if we've gone into recession. So that's the money supply, monetary policy conducted by the Federal Reserve. Now, Milton Friedman said basically that the whole thing could be managed by jiggling the money supply, by controlling it, which is true up to an extent. The only problem when you have other players like credit card companies and funds flying around the world, there's no way on earth you can control the money supply.
Cryptocurrency.
Yes. So free markets, doesn't work in that. And that was Thatcher's mistake too, because she tried it. Now, what happens when you have a major recession? Okay, well, let's look at, I've drawn it in red here. What happens is demand shrinks way down here, okay? Because there's layoffs, so demand drops and there's high unemployment. The GDP moves from here to here. So you're way down here. So what happens if the Federal Reserve says, okay, we'll try and cure this by increasing the money supply? So they try, and of course, this is what they did last time around. So here we go. Now you reach a point, you see, here, where you can increase it more, but in fact it goes straight down. Now, Keynes called this the liquidity trap. It may also be called the confidence trap. Because what happens is now it was a slightly different situation in the 30s. Because savings, when people save, of course, there's two forms of savings. They can put money in the bank and deposit, or they can hold it as cash. Now, in the 30s, people tended to hoard money, and they actually weren't putting it in banks because banks were failing. And so, when people hoard money, that doesn't go back to the banks to go in investment. Okay, so investment falls. So, in fact, there's no investment money to flow back in and make the economy grow. Okay, so so you have liquidity, but you have no investment. So you're stuck down. Now, nowadays, when you get these very low interest rates, you reach a point where, okay, there's a lack of business confidence. People say, well, look, I've got all this capacity. Why should I invest money building new plant when nobody wants it? Now, what the savers say is, look, why should I put as we say now, why do I put my money in the bank when I get what? I get 0.0001% return. And of course, investment from an investor's point of view is always risky. So my return I'm going to get on this risky investment is not worth it. So the savers are not investing their money, and the industrialists are not spending it. So what happens is, this is why the economy gets stuck down here. And so, and this, of course, there's only one way. So what you've got, you see, you've got spending over here in demand. Look, consumers are not spending. Savers are not, not putting it, they're hoarding the money. So there's only one way you can get out of this, and that is by government spending, which takes this. So they create the demand, and by spending, this curve moves up, and as it moves up, of course, you go above this liquidity trap point. So people then get, and of course the interest as they spend. Look, you're down here. The interest rates go up too. So people are more encouraged to invest, and the industrialists are more encouraged to invest in new plants. So this is why, by deficit spending in a recession, pulls you out of the recession. Now, as I've just said, this point is not understood by the majority of European governments and the Germans and my lovely government back in England. What happens if you're down here in deep recession and you say, the way out of this, folks, is to tighten our belts, is to quote what John Maynard said, why, us working people, we're having to tighten our belts. The government must do so too. Look what happens. You go that way. So the economy goes this way. You will not get out of recession. So the salient point I'm trying to tell you is the government is the only avenue by deficit spending that will pull you out of recession. So that's the salient point I want to tell you tonight. So now look what happened to poor Greece. Greece is down here. The triumvirate, the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission are telling Greece, you must cut your spending, government. You must. So poor old Greece now is down here. The economy shrunk by 25%. 50% of young people are unemployed, and this gang of clowns are telling them they're going to cut back even more. If I met Mrs. Merkel, who I believe is a physicist just like I am, I would tell her, you better get stick to physics, lady. And what I would, and these clowns, absolute clowns in the Tea Party, who think in the middle of a recession, as he did, I'm going to shut down the government because I want less taxation spending. Well, look, that's what's going to happen. You're going to go back into recession. I mean, thank God that Obama was here and did deficit spend, because that's what slowly pulled America out of recession, because you go above this liquidity point. And that was the essential point that Keynes made. But I think it's quite understandable that it's only government spending to get out of a deep recession. As I say, in a slight recession, the Federal Reserve can do it, okay? But a deep recession, no. Because the economy, the business confidence is so low, you're down here. All right, so that's the main message of Keynes' theory of employment, money, and interest. And it's if you hear your right-wing friends tell you that the neocons, the classical economics all by itself will get you out of recessions and lower business regulation, tell them, I'm sorry, you just don't understand economics. Because this recession and staying in it for 2 decades was real. And we just saw recently, what it took government spending to get out of it. Now, I showed you what happened in England when they said, and they convinced the public, even now, that we should deficit spend, cut back. And so that's why they stayed in recession for so long. And I said here, years ago, when I was saying, it took them, they had a treble dip recession in England. And that was why. And I can stand there and tell you now that fools, the Labour Party, stood there, never showed these curves, never explained to the public. So no wonder they should have been beaten. If you don't explain to people, and people are illy educated, yes. I mean, this is not that difficult really to understand. I mean, if you not understand some of it, believe me, most economists in Keynes' time didn't understand it. They just didn't understand. Anyway, so it is difficult. It's counterintuitive to deficit spend in a recession, but you have to do it. And by the way, where does the money come from? Basically, the Federal Reserve prints it. It doesn't come out of anyone's pocket. The money's just printed. Okay, the other thing is, so I've covered one of Keynes' proposals. The second thing I always talk about is a balanced trade, okay? So to do that, I will go back to how balanced trade worked when countries were on the gold standard in the 19th century, okay? So let's look at this. Very simplified. You have country A and you have country B, okay? So we could call that the USA and China, right? So we know that because we don't have balanced trade, we're always owing China money. That's what we know. Now, if we were under the gold standard, the debt, the trade deficit, would have to be paid in gold, right? Yeah. So, in this Bank of Internet, in fact, in Fort Knox, when countries got a deficit in the old days, gold bars were moved about. Okay, so what would happen is that to pay the debt, this represents gold bars, American gold bars, and they'd be moved to China, over here to the Chinese section. Okay. So what happens when you do that? Well, the money supply that I've talked about is equal to the amount of gold you've got, because you're on the gold standard. So if you run a deficit, the amount of gold you've got, right, you're paying the overseas country, the gold bars will shrink. You'll have fewer gold bars. So your money supply, therefore, will shrink. Okay? It's logical. And so, actually, the prices will shrink too, because it depends on the money supply. All right. So, by this payment, the prices supply here. By the reverse argument, over here, the money supply of China would increase, so their prices go up. So, in terms of trade, you have lower prices here and higher prices here, so you get balanced trade, okay? Because as Chinese goods get more expensive, you buy a few of them. As American goods gets cheaper, Chinese, and so on. So that's the way trade gets balanced. So what Keynes said is, look, gold, what he said was, gold is a barbaric relic. So what we're going to have is, we should have paper gold, basically, which he called the Bancor, right? Which Bancor, two words put together, bank gold, right? Bancor, see, Bancor. And he said, looking at, because remember, Britain has been in the trading business and ran the reserve currency for 300 years. So I think they knew a little bit about trade and what it takes. He said, looking at the situation after the Second World War, we need an amount, like a working capital amount in this bank of about $25 billion. The Americans said, we don't like this system, we want our own system. He wanted a situation where, just like the Federal Reserve, you can create this money. The US said, no, it's going to be by deposit. People have to put in a subscription of 25% gold and 75% notes. And then that will fund the world trade. Well, so now, this meant that this balanced system, the Bancor, was never accepted. In fact, the world liquidity, international trading liquidity, was funded by the US and the UK running a deficit. That's what funds the world trade. So we've never had a proper balanced system as Keynes proposed. Now, you know and I know what's happened because of that. Ever since the late 70s, America, well, in fact, what happened, about 1961, because of overseas spending by Americans, the $35 an ounce looked a bit shaky. So Kennedy came to Europe to ask the Europeans, especially the French, to start propping up the gold price. And they basically said, get lost, because what you've done is you flooded Europe with dollars, okay? So you're actually buying up European businesses based on, printed dollars. We want less liquidity. And of course, I've said this before, de Gaulle told him two things. One, this system can't last. And two, never put boots on the ground in Vietnam. But of course, what did he know? About 1968, Vietnam War was going and taking more overseas money. So the US had to get IOUs from the IMF to actually draw down some of the money they put in. In 73, of course, collapsed completely off the gold standard. So the balanced trade system that Keynes wanted never happened. So now you see the fact that ever since the late 70s, this trade deficit with America has been growing and growing to the point where it's about equal to the whole 1 year's worth of GDP and continuing. But of course, it's done terrible damage to the American economy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the three things that Keynes wanted, he wanted really a mechanism to get to tame this business cycle, to operate in such a way as to be able to get out of it. Okay, but anyway, so you must run a fiscal policy, which is the government demand, and a monetary policy together. That's to say, these ISLM curves must be run together so you can get the economy growing. Let me go back to that. So you see this demand curve, okay, is run by could be moved up and down by federal spending, and this is the money supply curve. Now, if you had an institution that was responsible for both, that would set the interest rates plus quantify the tax spending, okay, you could have a growing economy that would grow like this. So these two curves would be managed together, so you could grow the economy at a stable interest rate. Okay. Now, if you have the situation where the Fed is controlling this, and the government and consumers here, you see, these three things together can go all over the place. So you really need to run the two together, the IS and the spend. So, and that could be done, but you'd have to have a single institution that would do both, would control both. And I recommend under some democratic control. Okay, because then you wouldn't have these fluctuations. All right, so where do we sit today? Okay. So what does this model depict? This model can represent the UK economy and the US economy. And what it shows is two economies. It shows that the two economies are really in disaster mode. That's what it shows. So let's go. Why is that? What's happening? Well, again, you've got the same model that I described. You've got the supply and the demand, but look what happens. Okay, so here you have the gross national product. You have reinvestment. And funny enough, as I just said, most of this investment is by self-reinvestment. Very little is coming up here. So what is really happening? So okay, so this is consumer spending. Normally, they would spend their money by American goods. But with a trade deficit, you see, they're spending it overseas. So what does that do to savings? Well, it turns out this savings is reduced exactly by the overseas spending. So right there you have a reduction in savings. So what's happening when it goes to the banks? Well, there's very little coming back, trickle coming back in the way of investment, true productive investment. Mostly it's gone in two ways. The commercial side of it, of the banks, has increased by lending directly to the consumer. You see it running credit cards and so on and so forth, financing mortgages. Okay. But a growing part of it, the rest of it, is going to pure speculation. So that money, for example, because you have fluctuating exchange rates, the forex market, that's absorbing the flow here is 4 trillion a day, just being gambled. You had gambling on derivatives and so on. You have hedge funds. Basically, none of this is flowing back into the, for example, when you buy a stock, you're buying it from one person's pocket, to the next, okay? Not one penny goes back, to fund a corporation, okay? It's just a gambling den, basically, it's just a casino. So so you see, this is not only are you not saving enough, not much of it is flowing around in productive investment. So what is happening here? Well, America's moved its production base overseas. So a lot of this reinvestment, in fact, is not reinvested in American business, is going overseas. Okay. Now, so there's a simple equation. So how does this all balance out? Well, what happens is the English scenario, which is more advanced here. You've got money going overseas here as overseas investments by corporations. You've got trade deficits growing. It's now about $750 billion a year. How is that paid for? Well, the government sends IOUs, right? The Chinese are buying government bonds. And also, of course, you're selling assets. So in England, this process is continued on. So basically what's happened in England, over half of this is foreign owned. Now, that's the only way.
Half of it is what?
Is foreign owned. Half of the productive economy is in foreign ownership. All the car businesses, let me go through. All the car companies are foreign owned. There's not one British owned car company. All the utilities were privatized. They are all foreign owned. The Germans own the water, the French own the power. London Airport is run by the Spanish, and so on. Jaguar, for example, and the steel company is owned by Tata. Okay, America is going to go the same way. It's going. Yeah, it has to, because this. Now, one day when China has sucked every bit of knowledge it wants out of it will suddenly say, we don't want your government bonds anymore. Okay. And you can just imagine what's going to happen. Okay? So the most important thing happened under the Democratic administration in 1944. They wouldn't listen to Keynes. They didn't want balanced trade. They rejected it. And this is the result. It's a disaster. In my book, I outlined this, Sabotaging America. America is self-sabotaged. It has been an amazement to me that a country could do it to itself, but it has. And so this is why, see, when you have low reinvestment, oh yeah, we're investing, but we're investing in retail. Well, retail is very well, but it's not very productive. It's only when you have proper industry that investment creates better paying jobs and so on. It causes the economy to grow and becomes more efficient. That way you can pay higher wages and so on and so forth. This explains why in the 35 years we've stagnated. Okay? And people don't know what's wrong, but they're angry and upset because the wages have not flown through because we're not reinvesting in ourselves anymore. Now, when we tolerate 16 to 20 million people unemployed by the way the system works, and then last week we talked about the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. Well, goodness me, I mean, if you're unemployed, okay, and you know, you get some small government benefits, of course you will, to maximise it. And as there has been growth in the American economy, which is as they say, has raised all yachts, right? Yachts. That's what's been raised. So, you know, that's the upshot of not listening to Keynes, really. I mean, the man actually was a genius. I mean, he really was. I studied under people like that. I worked for someone called J.M.M. Pinkerton, who designed the world's first commercial computer in England in '46. And these people, their minds just they zip, okay? And we produce people like that. And of course, with Keynes, he met with Roosevelt. Roosevelt didn't understand the word he said. So, now the other thing, of course, what this has done, and as you know, we have a growing number of cartels. I mean, Marx was right. What Marx basically said was, you know, in these downturns, smaller companies gobble up the bigger companies gobble up the smaller ones. So you have increasing monopolies. And his theory was this would go on and on until there was a monumental crash, and then there'd be a revolution. Well, of course, you had the crash, but you didn't have the revolution. But now, of course, we've got international monopolies, cartels. They're not interested in the countries. They see the world as their playpen. They hide away in tax havens. They don't pay proper taxes. They don't repatriate their overseas earnings. They're stashed away, probably 5 or 6 trillion. They won't bring them home where we need it here to spend, okay? So you know, the whole thing is a disaster. Now, okay, every talk I've given, I've said, to repeat myself, which I've said many times, we need to implement something along the lines of Keynes' balanced trade proposal. We need to get ahead and reform this whole financial system. I mean, this is just taking money in pure speculation. And so what happens when the top 1% get all the money? It doesn't go back in investment, it goes into asset speculation. And so we see in London, for example, prices have gone through the roof. I mean, my little house is worth over $1 million. I mean, it's ridiculous, you know. I mean, it completely distorts everything. So we have to reform the banking system so we can then refund. So this true investment flows back, and we create a proper, you know, industrial system in this country. This route we've gone on for the last 35 years, and they're all complicit. Reagan, Bush Senior, Clinton, Bush Junior, and now Obama. Now my book on the cover, those of you who have read it, I listed all the culprits, and I put Obama there with a question mark. I would take that off now. He's along with the rest. He's along with the rest. They're going to sign up this TTIP, TPP, you know. And of course, it's all done in secret. We don't know what. But what we do know is that the major cartels and the banking cartel have written it. And you just have to read through the rules of the World Trade Organization to see what that means. And read my book, Sabotaging America. And basically, that's why I wrote that book, because America has been sabotaged by these very people. And no one I've ever heard has stood up and ever explained this whole thing to the American people. I mean, basically, the American dream is gone. It's no more. You forget about it. I mean, healthcare is too, I mean, as I said, it's so expensive you might as well die, you know. But I mean, and it's same in England. I mean, the young people are lost. Certainly in London, you can't get married, you can't live anywhere. The only way you can live is if you 10 of you get together and maybe rent a house or something. You can't, you know. It's actually, this system is destroyed London. But I mean, the whole social housing estates have been ripped down, rebuilt for Chinese people to buy. I mean, it's absurd. It's totally absurd by politicians who have not the brains of my Siamese cat at home. I mean, and that's what I tell them straight to their face. Yeah, you're just you're not fit to run a Welsh school in Brick Lane in London, let alone run the government. You know, and I say, poor Greece. I mean 50% of the young people unemployed, and you want to impose more austerity? It's absurd. It's obscene. It's immoral. And anybody who right wing proves me wrong, please come and prove me wrong. Please tell me where am I wrong. I mean, the evidence is there. You can see it. It's a right wing agenda who want to decrease the size of the government. Blah blah. But you can't. The government has to be there to regulate things, because otherwise it goes way off track, totally off track. Okay, that's my presentation for tonight. I do hope it's a pretty daunting topic to speak in an hour. I hope you've understood it. Please ask me questions to clarify what I've said.
Question time.
All right. Why don't we go around the room in a clockwise fashion?
Yeah, very good presentation, John. Let me ask you just one simple question.
Yes.
We did have the car industry, which all except for Ford was ready to go under and fold. What do you think would have happened to our car industry if we let it go down completely? Who do you think would have taken over the car industry?
Well, what happened in England? The Germans or the Japanese would have bought it over. In fact, as you know, Fiat took over Chrysler, right? So that's what would. Now, if you want your country to be foreign owned, so you become slaves working for some foreign corporation, well, good luck. I personally think that you should actually own your own means of production, okay? That's what I think that you should have a say in it and participate. But when you sell everything off, I mean, the back of my new book will be a joke which shows Buckingham Palace, the name changed to Buckingham Hotel, and the Chinese script saying, you fools, and the BBC man is interviewing the city fat cat, and the city fat cat's saying, it's a dreadful shame that we've had to sell off our last British-owned asset, but the fees I made were terrific.
John,
Yes.
the first chart you had on gross domestic product,
Yes.
is that denominated in dollars?
Yes. Well, it is denominated in the national currency. Yes.
Well, here is the quandary that I would put to you for comment, is the 1910 value of the dollar compared to the 2015 value of the dollar. We're probably somewhere south of 3 cents.
Correct. Yes.
Correct, yes?
Well, that's probably true.
But
yes.
your GDP growth is not denominated in dollars. So what
Well,
does that
no.
really say about the
No,
GDP
actually-
growth?
No, actually, okay. It's in real. It's what it's called real dollars, real spending power. So when you talk about earnings and what's happened, you distinguish between nominal and real. So if you're doing comparisons like this, it's in real dollars. That's to say, adjusted for inflation. That's the way you calculate it properly. Otherwise, you're saying you're comparing apples and oranges. So everything like wages are real wages. That's to say, adjusted for inflation. Shannon, you're next.
Okay, now, if I understood you right, you said that the premise and the mentality of the UK policy and Greece is that they got into this mess because this 2008 because of overspending. And I mean, did they believe that? I mean, wasn't it like a major failure? I mean, it's corruption. I mean, and it started in the U.S. I mean,
yes, but you see, the British public have been persuaded that the cause of the downturn, okay, they're saying, well, okay, the bankers did bad things, but what really caused it was the overspending, the deficit spending by the government, by the New Labour. And so there wasn't the flexibility to pull out of it. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you have your own Federal Reserve, you're in charge of your own money supply. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, I hear another topic, which is this federal spending has been misspent, okay? Well, what Keynes said doesn't matter. You can dig up holes and fill them in, but you're creating work. And the mere fact you're creating work, multiplies and brings you up above this liquidity trap point where you're trapped down when you're in this violent recession. So you have to deficit spend, and really, if Greece had its own currency, it could do that. And my recommendation is to what is happening now to poor Greece is the Germans are saying, we're going to lend you the money, okay, but you have to cut all social benefits and the now, the only reason we're going to lend you the money is so you can repay the bondholders in the European banks, okay? So the Greek people are not benefiting from that. The economy won't grow, so they're stuck, okay? So you do what Iceland did, which is say, hey, it wasn't us, the people, that had the benefit of this money. By the way, when you buy a bond, it's a risk, okay? Sorry, you've lost. That's what Iceland said, and goodbye, and tough luck, right? If I invest in the stock market, okay, say I buy Kentucky Fried Chicken's stock, and it drops by half, well, I don't rush back and say, hey, I want my money back. What would they say? Drop dead, John. You made a bad mistake. Good luck, right? Basically, that's what. But anyway, next.
I want to ask you a question about that specific thing, and then I'm going to ask my question.
Okay.
Specifically, the deficit spending on labor to fill, dig holes and fill in holes.
Yes.
Well, now, digging holes and filling in holes seems to me like building weapons and taking them to the Middle East and blowing them up, as opposed to building infrastructure, such as a new electrical grid, a new transportation, building up education, and so on. And so, in my mind, it's not there is a difference in the spending.
No, absolutely. No, that was like a joke on Keynes's part. No, obviously, you don't want to waste money. In fact, when in a recession, as I pointed out, interest rates are very low. So government borrowing, is very low. And this notion, you'll hear it, oh, we're loading up our grandchildren with all this debt. Well, when you build schools and infrastructure, the grandkids are going to benefit from this. You see, it's just like when you borrow for a mortgage on a house, okay? It takes you 30 years to pay. If your kids inherit, they benefit, you see. So it's an investment. So basically speaking, when you throttle the economy, you really stifle everything. You can't, it's, oh, we've got no money, Okay, well, so therefore we can't spend on, the major two things we should be spending on is Alzheimer's and cancer, really. And with a surplus 15 to 20 million unemployed, we've got the human capital. I mean, you talk about the efficiency of the capitalist system. It's not very efficient in my mind when you've got this army of unemployed. I mean, how is that efficient? I mean, by its very nature. I mean, I'm not advocating Marxism or communism. I'm just saying, look, Keynes said you can do better, and as I pointed out, in the 50s and 60s in England, 1.5% unemployment, right the way through, and that was conscious Keynesian demand management. Okay, so it can be done. It's never been done here because, as I say, Keynes was never accepted, basically, because but anyway, yes. So yes, if you're going to spend in a recession, build infrastructure, build ports and stuff.
So I call that preparing the ground, laying the groundwork for the recovery.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that actually, that spending actually, as they say, creates the recovery.
Mm-hmm. But then it also creates new business opportunities because
exactly.
Another better internet infrastructure, better electrical grid,
right.
better
exactly.
So,
and so that's what you do. So that's why there has to be a place for government spending. It really does. So because in fact, in a boom time, governments should be spending less, actually. That's what they should do. Now, that's what governments don't have the willpower to do. This is why I say there should be a separate entity controlling the government spending limit plus the monetary supply. So you'll have this balanced economy.
Now, here's my question. How did we get into the situation where right now the stock market is being propped up by corporate executives taking the profits from the corporations and buying back the stock in order to make the value of their stock skyrocket without benefiting the economy at all?
Okay, let me explain that. It actually is not the corporate executives doing that. I know they're doing it, but the main feature has been quantitative easing, okay? The Federal Reserve has been pumping money into the banks, okay, who in turn have been propping up all these asset values, so to restore the financial situation of the banks. Okay, so you've had an asset boom. In fact, you see, when you do that, you've done nothing. All you've done is inflated the prices of assets. You've not helped the economy any. You see, so we've had this tremendous expansion.
So if I'm the chairman of College of Complexes Corporation, and I take all of my profits from the $3 at all the meetings around the country, and buy back, if I'm the chairman of the College of Complexes Corporation, and I take all the profits from the $3 at all the meetings around the country, and use it to buy back the stock instead of expanding new colleges of complexes, what I'm doing is I'm increasing the value of the asset, but I'm actually putting it in a more precarious position, aren't I?
Well, look, it's the same asset. I mean, all you've done is pumped up the price for the asset. You've not increased the productive part of the economy. Right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's what's happened.
Yeah. A couple of quick questions. Who wrote the TPP, the business and corporations? The names of those who wrote the TPP? And
The answer, the quick answer, is the multinational corporations. The banks and the major multinationals wrote every last word in that has been written by the corporate entities.
yeah. Second question, and just to repeat what you had said earlier, that was it in 1945 or the 40s that this stuff started, where the rejection of balanced trade started? Is that how we got to where we are today?
Well, it was.
And how do we get out of it? What needs to be done?
Okay. Actually, the rejection of Keynes was 1944, because he proposed a system. Now, how we get out of it is we implement a balanced trade situation. Where I explained back when you had, I think you hear when I talked about the gold standard, but that that mechanism forces balanced trade. So you see, but because of that, you cannot then export your productive base to China. It would not be possible. Okay?
John, I have at least an opinion, and I'm looking for someone to blame here, and Keynes seems to be the
person to blame, he could
person
take
to
it.
blame. Well, I don't know. I mean, we've
could
had
take
this devastating inflation, which has really plundered everyone who's saved, and we are now in a debt-based economy since it's been untethered from gold. Isn't this, since you brought up cancer, isn't this kind of like increasing the size of the tumor and saying that this is the health of the host?
Okay, we've had a problem of inflation. Okay, you're correct. Now, what I said was inflation basically is too much demand. Okay, be it consumer spending, be it investment, or government spending, chasing too few goods. Okay, that causes inflation. Now, the problem is in America, inflation really began going hard at it because of deficit spending in Vietnam War. Secondly, it got another jolt because of the tenfold rise in oil prices, because of the Middle East situation. So that got inflation really going, and it took Paul Volcker raising interest rates to well over 20% to kill inflation. Okay, but that being said, if you run a true ISLM curve balance, as I proposed, and I have an entity to control government spending, set the limit, and also control the money supply, it could be possible to have a growing economy that without inflation. I mean, or very little inflation. So it could be done if you set the right sort of government institution that would do it. Could be done.
Government would be my last choice, but go ahead.
Well, no, I'm not saying government. I'm saying, in fact, the Monetary Committee in England is comprised of external economists. Okay, you have a group of people who understand economics, who agree with the system, who can run it. But it has to be. So you have to control the money supply and public spending, both. Okay, Margaret.
Okay, I have two questions.
Ma'am, he has a mic right now.
Oh, I was just going to ask you what you thought the impact of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Oh, well, yes. You can have, and some communities do have, their own coins, and so yes, you can have all these different monetary systems, provided by everyone knows the rules. I mean, it's just like having a barter system where people know the value and use it. The problem is, as we discovered with Bitcoin, is you can over the internet you can really cheat the whole system. So it's very dangerous actually when you do such things. It can be done. I know there's a community in England, I think, that has its own coinage, or you have a credit, you see, which is, and then you can use that credit in local businesses. It can work, but it's a matter of having total trust in the whole scheme. Problem with Bitcoin is it's worldwide, and who can trust anybody over the internet? You must be crazy, man. So, all right, Margaret, please.
Okay, I've got a couple of quick questions. First, the explanation is back.
Close to the mic, please.
I've been aware of him for years, but it's still much
It's
over
not
my
working.
head.
It's not working. Check the on-off switch there. Let's see.
Is there a green light on?
No, it's a red light.
Battery out.
Battery's probably
I think
out.
I can speak loudly enough
Bring it over and I'll
without.
put fresh batteries in it.
I have just two questions.
Right.
Would you
Bring it
give,
here.
pardon, I have two questions.
Right.
Would you give the neocons the benefit of the doubt, or do you think they have a more sinister objective for this country, number one? And number two, if things continue as they are, and the neocons continue to have such power, what do you predict for the USA?
Okay. The neocons really, it's ideological. In the South, they're basically still fighting the Civil
yes.
War. You know, they're against anything federal government does. So they want to reduce the size of government. Now, same thing in England. You know, I could equate the Tory party to the neocons. So what they've done is they don't like social programs. They don't like government services, basically. They want to see everything privatized because they believe in their way of thinking that that's more efficient. Okay. Now, it's proven to be the case, certainly with the National Health Service, that the National Health Service is probably the most efficient service in the world. It's certainly the least expensive for the amount of people covered. But they don't agree with that. It's ideological. By definition, anything public one must be bad. Okay, just by definition. Therefore, it must basically what has happened with all the public services in England. They've privatized them, and of course it's a monopoly or a near monopoly, an oligopoly, and the prices have gone up through the roof. Okay, and that's common knowledge. Now, I do object to public services being privatized and the civil servants that ran them and walking away becoming multimillionaires at the public expense. The recent privatization of the post office was another example. I mean, the premise that they had to get a few key investors for stability. Guess what they did? Who were the key investors in the Royal Mail? They gave it to hedge funds. Now, the hedge funds, the price shot up by 50%. They sold out. They made hundreds of millions of dollars for nothing, doing nothing. No added value. I mean, it was an outrage what they did. But you see, when you're driven by this ideology that anything the government does must be bad, you know. Now, the other thing to say is, I spent my life doing real product, okay? And I was on the hook for it. And you know, without boasting, we had major problems with a lot of our products. I was called for to fix it. Said, John, you can fix it. For example, I was brought over here to do computer printing. And we had major problems. One was the paper feed problem, because remember how it used to jam? Yes. You couldn't possibly have a computer printer jamming every, you know. We had a problem with reliability. We had a problem with maintenance and so on. So, and we had a problem with reserve, because it was reverse zeroography. So, you know, I was on the hook for that. So this was real productive investment. Okay. So now, to do all of this, I had to have a plan. Fundamental. I was given a budget. I always did this. I always met with the people before we even started, and I said that we're going to put together a plan, and we're going to do it together. Because each one of you is going to sign up for the plan. I am not going to tell you how to do your job. You're all degree professionals, and you know your individual jobs better than I do. Now, I've given you the whole plan of what we're going to do. You work out how long it's going to take, and you sign up that we can do it. And then we'll move. Now, I was pressured by a new boss to come up with a plan in half a day. And he came into my meeting with my senior people, and he said, when we're going to do it? And I said to him, sit down, this is my meeting, be quiet. Come out, blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, look, I don't run business. I don't do top down, tell them what to do. Okay? I said, the reason I always meet my targets is because my people sign up to me. We have a plan. The same thing. The idea that laissez-faire, no plan, no regulation can get things done is idiotic. It's a warped ideology. This system is not self-healing. Things don't get better by themselves. Now, recently, the British government has proposed that we fund antibiotic drug research because we know that the current drugs are becoming less and less effective. Now, problem is, Big Pharma won't invest because these drugs, when developed, have to be kept in low supply, because if you've got high supply, they lose their effectiveness. So the profit motive is not there. So the only thing that can do it is a government to step in and say, look, we need to do this, and pharma will find you to do it. But this idea is anathema to these neocons and people think like this. This is, so to run a proper country, you must plan. You can't have, a complete mayhem. It's like saying, well, everyone can drive at 500 miles an hour, down the street. You don't have traffic lights. The idea is absurd to begin with. It's the same thing. I mean, we have global warming. Oh, well, it doesn't exist, right?
Now, John, what if it
So,
continues that way?
what it
What is your
continues-
prediction?
What I think failure to truly plan, understand that, I think what we have, especially, I hate to say it, with American policy, foreign policy, is a failure to understand the consequences of things. You go around the world leaving a trail of wreckage because you didn't understand the environment you're getting into. You didn't understand basically what you were doing or why you were doing it. The CIA ran amok everywhere. Overthrowing governments, blah blah blah. It was a failure to properly think through the consequences. The failure of proper planning. And this really boils down to Keynes. You must think through what you're doing economically, what the consequences will be, and it's a failure actually to explain. This is why when Ray gave his speech, I said to him, Ray, well, what's this person's plan? What is he actually going to do? Now, Ted Cruz and his merry men would say, I believe in neoconservative economics. The answer is, you do nothing. And magically, the economy will revive and reach an optimum condition. Well, I'm sorry, that's not the way it is. When you let the...
Okay, I have two easy questions.
Yes.
When you were speaking, you named all these different companies, corporations in England that are now owned by other companies.
Other countries, yes.
Other countries.
Yes, foreign countries.
Right. And you mentioned Rolls-Royce.
Yes.
It is owned by whom?
Owned by Volkswagen.
And Bentley's owned by
Germany.
Tata, which is
No,
India.
Bentley's owned by BMW.
Oh, that's right. And it's Jaguar that's owned by Tata.
Jaguar Land Rover is owned by Tata in India, yeah.
Rolls-Royce is owned by whom?
Volkswagen,
Germany.
Germany.
Germany, okay.
Yeah,
And one other question, it's very easy.
And this-
Do you know
so-
what the corporate tax rate is in England?
yes, I have a chart here. It's around about, I think it's about 25% or something like that,
Wow,
tax rate. But I have a chart here, I showed it on
that's the
talk show.
demise right there.
Well, the fact of the matter is, everyone, even I, pay taxes. taxes are the price for living in a civilized country and doing things in a joint way. The fact of the matter is, the major American cartel corporations like Starbucks, Amazon, pay very little taxes in the countries they operate. In England, for example, they pay about 3%, effectively, okay? So they want to make profits overseas, but they don't want to pay taxes overseas. Plus, what profits they do make, they keep overseas, and they don't repatriate them and pay taxes here on that. So that's what they do. Plus, of course, they are monopolistic by their very nature.
John?
Yes.
I have a couple of short questions.
Yes.
One is, it appears that the more England has reprivatized their industry, the poorer they have become.
Sorry, again?
The more they have
Privatized, yes.
reprivatized their industries, the poorer the nation has become.
Yeah. Well, yes. The rot really started with my friend Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she wiped out all publicly owned big businesses in England. She shut down the mines, the steel business, privatized the rail, and of course what happens is all these are basically, these utilities are basically monopolistic in their operation. So of course, being monopolies, they're able to gain monopoly profits. And so yes, that's exactly what you think would happen. These privatized companies do well, and of course the public suffers. And of course the other thing that happens is, as the economy shrinks, and by the way, the outflow is such that you have a negative investment actually in British industry. It's negative because the only investment is coming in is foreign investment.
The second question.
Oh, sorry.
During the Depression, when Roosevelt was first elected president, and he implemented a lot of program which the gentleman spoke about last week.
Yes.
The forestry programs, the pump priming programs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was somewhat influenced by Keynes, wasn't it?
Well, actually, strange to say, he ran on a program of austerity, did Roosevelt, before he was elected. Well, when he got into, funny enough, following along with Hoover. Now, once he got into power, he realized that things weren't going so well, so he initiated all these measures, and so there was, which had a palliative effect, but the real recovery was caused by Herr Hitler, and the real money for the 2.5 years of the war came right out of Great Britain's purse. Okay. So that was it, and sometime I will talk about all of that. But that's where the recovery started now, because America was out of the war for the first 2 years or so, and the only country left fighting was Britain, and it was cash on the barrelhead. And I have to say that the war was looked upon as a commercial opportunity by the democratic government here, and they took full advantage of it.
Building
Yes.
on Margaret's comments,
Yes.
I appreciate your presentation, I appreciate your remedies. I see no constituency for them in the United States for the rest of my life. I'm sorry to take the gloomy road. With the bogus conservative think tanks, with Fox News, with individualism and no history of community in this country except during warfare. It's all going to boil down to politics in putting a program like this together, and so I'm curious, as you are, what might actually lie ahead.
Well, let me tell you what. Okay, a British economic historian called Robert Skidelsky wrote a 3-volume history on Keynes. I advise everybody to read it because it's very, very instructive. So what, and I've said this before, what Skidelsky has said is it's going to take 2 more huge crashes before the American people will wake up.
2 more, not just 1.
No, 2 more. He says that's what he says. It's going to take 2 more. The thing is that this is what is going on. I mean, have I said anything here that people would disagree with this current model? Is anything wrong here? Okay. Well, but this is reality. Now, the public really are absolutely unaware of this problem, of this deindustrialization, okay, and this huge deficit that's being built up. They have this angst. They know something's wrong. They're unhappy. Blah blah blah. As like as not, they'll blame Obama, and we'll have the Tea Party elected in a couple of years. It's quite, given what England did, it's quite possible. It's it's a very worrying picture. In fact, what I might do is write this presentation up tonight as a brief monologue, really, and then publish it, because seems to me that I mean, I hope most of you followed the rationale for this. Is it difficult to present, and I do it with some trepidation, but I hope you followed it, at least the main essence of it, and what Keynes said. I mean, Keynes was, and when he said all this, it was a total, iconoclastic groundbreaker, because it was totally against received opinion. What people said in the 30s, politicians, basically, we must reduce the wages, and we must cut government spending, and things will recover. Well, you'll see, it would make it worse. It would make it worse. But that was the medicine that they proposed. And for poor Greece now, they're proposing the same thing.
Hey gang, listen, look at your clocks or your watches, it's 8:30. We've had a good, complete presentation. We are loaded with questions from a good presentation. So, and we're not finished with questions. We need to stop in about 15 minutes so we can pick up the stuff and disconnect and get out of here so they can close and go home at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to wing it tonight, and I'm going to cut out the comments, because I think we're getting so much good out of the questions and the responses to that. I'll ask your forgiveness in allowing everyone to have a question. Thank you, George. I feel absolved. Is that okay?
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
want,
All
Jim.
right, carry on for a little bit longer.
Jim. No, I want your comment. I want your CPA comment.
Do I understand correctly that you're saying that Mr. Keynes' position is that when there's a downturn in the economy, in order to stimulate, there needs to be deficit spending on the part of the government?
Correct, yes.
What's the other half of it?
Well, the other half is when there's an upturn, there has to be reduced spending by the government, otherwise you'll get inflation.
In other words, they're supposed to pay off or redeem the deficit spending.
Yes.
Has that ever been tried?
Well,
Implemented, I guess, is a better word.
Look, what I proposed was an agency to force that to happen, okay? That's what I proposed. You heard me say that. Because yes, when you overspend, when the consumer overspends, when you overinvest, and when governments overspend, then you overheat the economy and you get inflation, okay, which is what we had. But other things can cause inflation, like the oil prices going up by a factor of 10. So yes, what Keynes would have said, because he tackled the problem of the recession, but you also have a problem of things going the other way, as you said. So this is why I've said here now and before, we need an agency to make sure the government actually sets a limit. Okay, and when you have an overspending, then you could have an automatic reduction in spending.
Well, should that agency be called the elected representatives of the people?
Well, look, whatever.
They're the ones that
No. Look, unfortunately, the majority of elected representatives simply do not understand finance and economics. That's the problem. They just don't. What I have said tonight, basically here, is not understood by 90% of the elected politicians. Sorry to say, they are basically lawyers mostly, and you know, to run an economy, you have to have studied economics and finance. Okay, you must understand. You must run a business, and you must understand what it takes to pay a payroll and to create new products and blah blah blah.
Did Keynes ever run a business?
He actually ran a very successful investment business. No, he ran a. No.
Yeah, investments. Let me ask you one. Okay, do you think that the Federal Reserve System, as it's presently structured, is a good thing for our economy?
Simply no, because it is a private bank run by bankers, and so it's a shield for the banking system. So, as you saw in this last downturn, with Paulson from Goldman Sachs as Treasury Secretary, what you've got, and please read my book, Sabotaging America, because I talk about the cozy money club. You have this group of people that go from Wall Street to the Treasury to the Federal Reserve, like Timothy Geithner did, round and round in this cozy, and so it's an incestuous cozy relationship, which doesn't, I think, do justice to the country.
Do you support the premise that the ownership and functioning of the Federal Reserve should be made transparent?
Absolutely. No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you know, honestly, I believe in democracy. I mean, look, we've had enough of dictatorships. I don't believe in fascism, okay, on one hand. I don't believe in, communism and Marxism on the other hand, okay? So, but I do believe in democracy. I think that the problem is, what we have today is people do not, they feel disenfranchised. They believe they don't have a say, okay? And in fact, the most important thing I think, which I've advocated here before, everyone should own his own means of livelihood. You shouldn't have a system which causes 20 million people to be unemployed. Everybody should have a say at work. I believe in employee ownership. I say it over and over. In England, the two most successful entities, in fact, employing about 100,000 people, John Lewis and Waitrose, is employee owned. It's the most respected retail and grocery store in England. Because it gives you a fair deal, the prices are good, and the service is great, and they stand behind it. And it's, you know, and in Spain, in Mondragon, it's got about 120 million people. It makes white goods, it does software, and in this recession, it's in the Basque country of Spain, set up by a Catholic prelate before the war, right after the Spanish Revolution. You know, that's thriving and successful. It has a 6-to-1 top-to-bottom pay scale. Okay, 6-to-1. Now, this absurd, so...
Well, you
You know, there are ESOPs in this country, there are 2 or 3 in Dallas.
No, I know, and I agree with them, and I think Jim wrote for once. No, the thing is that properly run, like anything else, they can be successful. I mean, basically speaking, I was pretty outspoken. The reason I never was fired was because I was too useful, really. But I always spoke my mind, and I said to the manager above me, leave me alone, and I'll work with my people as a team, and we'll get the job done. And that's what we did. And you know, this country has got to get back to valuing its people, and that's what it's lost. And it's got to get back to giving some hope to its people.
Okay, another economist that you've spoken on before, Piketty, and my very primitive understanding of him, or my very basic understanding, is that his idea is, he's definitely, you know, he seems to be a follower in this. He says, like, he sees the big disparity of wealth as the enemy, number one, and he believes taxation is kind of an important way. But how in the world would you take the tax from these big multinationals?
Okay, how do we get there? Well, okay, all right. Well, I believe that instead of having job centers, we have business creation centers, okay? So instead of paying people to be unemployed and have the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, we do as Italy does. They take 10 people and they pay them to start a business, okay? Now, I would go further. I would have a consolidation of business creation and local colleges, okay? So we have centers of excellence in terms of manufacturing, you know, arts, design, what have you. But we guarantee that we'll start businesses. Now, they'll fail, okay? Bound to fail. So what? What you've done is you teach people to work ethic, you give them some hope,
experience.
Okay, and maybe they'll grow and do some good. I'd rather do that than have them unemployed, doing crime, and stuck in jail. Because when you run a system with that amount of unemployed for so long, and you, especially, you know, the minority communities, what can you expect but crime, jail, and so on? And you know, frankly, moral decay. So, you know, that's what I would do.
John, I was wondering whether you had the neocons confused with libertarians. Some of the critique I think you were offering was libertarian. Now, you know, the neocons came from the left and inflicted the conservatives. So I really am having a little trouble understanding that. If I was going to work that into a question, the neocons appear to be a visible arm of the same group that wrote NAFTA, GATT, and is now writing TPP. And these people up here, this is an authoritarian group who seem to be trying to direct this economy right into the ditch.
Correct. I tend to agree. I tend to agree.
Okay, well, I have 2 quick questions for the first one. I think a yes or a no is probably sufficient.
Okay.
Do you think that the reason that the conservatives in the United States are so opposed to Keynes is because he was gay and their Bibles were getting in the way?
He actually, no, he wasn't gay. I mean, he married a ballerina, so you know he was associated with the gay fringe and the Bloomsbury set, but there is no name. Well,
He was in the closet.
yeah.
Well, anyway,
no, he was. So I think it's a stretch.
You're giving the question
Yes.
more seriousness than it
Right.
deserves.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry.
And here's the other unserious question.
All right. Okay.
Do you think that the people in the United States will revolt, assuming this continues in the direction it's going, do you think the people in the United States will revolt before the people that control the power have enough money to hire mercenaries to prevent us from revolting?
Well, you know, we're headed towards fascism, actually. And that's what Hitler did exactly.
Exactly, that's what I got.
So, you see, democracy is a very delicate flower where people actually have control and vote and so on. But we've seen in my lifetime a swing to the left and to the right. In the 30s, I was born in the 30s, that was the problem of the ultra left and the ultra right. And you know, my family, in a way, I paid a big price for fighting that. Okay, and the fact they did, I think, was a near-run thing. Actually, as they say, it's a near-run thing. So yes, the worry is we could easily tend towards fascism if people, you see, the truth of the matter is that when Hitler came to power, it was the end of the Weimar Republic, and it was shattered. Now, if you want me, I'll go into details about what Helmar Schacht did, the German Chancellor, but he put the country back on its feet. And so the German economy did recover in the 30s, ever since, because it was national socialism. Basically, it was fascism. Okay, but the economy did recover, and the Germans, of course, were for that, were appreciated him, and so on and so forth. So yes, we could, the way it's going, we are veering towards fascism. That's the. If we go much further, that's the way we'll end up.
Okay, gang. That makes a point. We'll thank John tonight for coming out and speaking to us. Really appreciate his presentations always. To me, John has the unique ability to take a subject that's very technical. If you take his subject tonight and go to a typical college and you put it in front of students who have, say, 3 years of college behind them, and they haven't gotten very deep into economics, they're not going to understand very much of what he said tonight. So, to me,
I disagree.
Yes, we can disagree, George. One of the great aspects of our group. But I appreciate him coming and taking a subject that's a challenge to present to a general audience and making it understandable. So again, thank you, John, so much.
Very good, John.
Thank you guys for being accommodating to changing the format up. I'm sorry we don't have time to have comments. We always enjoy them. We could easily do that for another hour, but the doors would be locked and the lights would be off, and we'd be in the doghouse. So bail it out. If anybody, I see one more bill being waved at me. If anybody else has some money for the coffers, will please catch me and put it in, and we'll appreciate it. Remember, next week is Memorial Day weekend, and we'll take a weekend off because a lot of people will either be going somewhere or they'll have company in. So we will miss your faces and miss coming, but enjoy it, and we'll see you the week after that. Thanks, and good night.